Two. One more. Two. Let me stop sending music. I think that's confusing. I stop sending music now. Chick. Two.
Okay, everybody, it looks like everybody's taking their seats. Thank you for being here for the last plenary session today. It is open to everybody here. Please ignore some of the things on the screen because that's for our virtual audience who is joining us today. So welcome to the International Networking and Capacity Building session. We have 4 excellent presentations, 5 excellent speakers during this session. And let's get started. The first speaker is Daniela Barrera-Bissot. Is that okay? Yeah, okay. Daniela holds a BSc and an MSc in Environmental Science from Barcelona, joining OSRO in 2012, gaining extensive experience as both a senior spill response specialist and senior consultant. In 2019, Daniela joined the Sea Alarm team as senior technical advisor, where she provides technical advice preparedness work, designs, and delivers training courses and exercises on oil wildlife preparedness and response. She is also part of the Aurora Network Secretariat, managing and delivering EU-funded projects and advancing international collaboration on marine wildlife emergency response. So please welcome Daniela.
Thank you, Mike. Let's see if we can get this. Oh, but I'm not getting my slides down there, are we? Am I? I'm not getting my slides down on the screen.
The holding slide on the screen. This does not eat into your 20-minute.
I know. I think that's it. Thank you. So I'm going to be talking about wildlife response preparedness building in a changing world. And I want to start with Sea Alarm because we are celebrating 25 years this year. So 25 years of professionalizing oil wildlife response internationally. For those that you don't know us, Sea Alarm is an independent and impartial advisor and facilitator. We are just 4 professionals working full-time on oil wildlife preparedness and response. We are not hands-on like many of you are, but we connect stakeholders. Good. Okay, thank you. I'll start a little bit again. 4 professionals, I think it's a bit too loud, but anyway, 4 professionals working full-time on wildlife response and preparedness. We are not hands-on. Is it working now? Yeah, it went low. Okay, good. Not hands-on, but connecting stakeholders, all sorts of stakeholders for an effective response. So we respond, we analyze, we envision, we innovate, we motivate, we propose, we fund, we manage, we share. And we consider ourselves as an international force multiplier. And I want to stop here to just mention somebody in our team, Hugh Nykamp, which I think has been a key force multiplier for oil wildlife response. And he's not here, he sent his apologies, but I think it was worth mentioning it. So what have been Sea Alarm's main achievements? So 25 years ago, international oil wildlife response was a little bit ad hoc. So Sea Alarm decided to connect industry and authorities so that we could work together. So 20 years ago, and we are also celebrating this year, 20 years of relationship with OSRL, we started working with OSRL, IPICA, ITOP. We also started, after the demand from the industry, analyzing the world, creating our country profiles, and registering all the data on our database, not just the information from the countries, but also context to be prepared. We also started working with Europe, European Commission, regional agreements, and we started working with industry regarding the needs of the industry to have a response on wildlife. So we started leading that joint industry project to get GOWRS going, and GOWRS is what it is now, and it's live. But it was a process. It was, and I'm sure Jenny will be explaining about that in her next presentation. So in parallel, EOW, and I'm presenting later on that as well. EOW is a network that connects also authorities in Europe. So both networks, GOWRS, EOW, they share, they work together, they publish good practices. So 25 years later, I think we've managed to get two very nice and well-prepared self-managed networks. We've got structural connections, and we work globally, regionally, and at national, local level. So how's preparedness in the world? So from our country profiles, we've depicted this big map where you can see lots of red countries, lots of countries that are less prepared, with a poor, what we call poor basis on coherent wildlife response. Also limited basis. So the question is, how do we get green countries and organizations like EOW or GOWRS to support those countries that are not green? Is that possible? Are they prepared to support our support? So the other question is, how do we turn them green? That's another key question, and I think we have been talking about this during the whole conference. How do we get countries better prepared? So CLM will continue to provide those corridors to responders so that responders can focus on what matters most, which are the animals. We will keep on getting and trying to get the recognition from industry and authorities. And we will keep learning lessons, because we say that if you stop learning, you stop being an expert. So we will keep going on that, innovating and internalizing and sharing knowledge. So what are the key preparedness principles? First of all, keeping up-to-date standards. We've got standards all around. So globally, we've got the two magnificent guidelines from IPICA. They have been developed by experts. We were leading one of them. So they are there, and they are there to be used. But they also connect with regional standards. So we've got the EOW standard series as well. So those both are connected. And of course, we need to make sure that at national and local level, those standards are implemented so that they read to each other and they connect to each other. So keeping up standards up to date at all levels. And that's what the arrow is doing. Then attaching all wildlife response to what we call institutional force multipliers. Force multipliers at different levels. We can talk global, regional, or local and national. And we have those levels, and we attached to them through specific industries, authorities, and NGOs. And just as examples, at global level, we have OSRL, IPICA, the shipping industry, authorities like IMO, IOPC, as NGOs, GOWRS, CLM. So they are all force multipliers, and we go through different levels. So at regional levels, GeoWACAF, and I think Tanya is going to explain to us a bit later on that. Regional seas agreements, NGOs like EOW or CLF ourselves. And then at local or national level, all countries are starting to be prepared. So they are also force multipliers in their own country. So delivering engagement philosophy. When you have an incident, you might or might not be prepared. You might or might not have resources. But and the scenarios might be challenging, and everything gets into a big pot. So what do we need? We need to engage. We've got, on one hand, an IMS structure that is dealing with the whole overall response. On the other hand, we've got the wildlife branch. And Mike Short was talking this morning about how are they connected? Are they working separately? Are they semi-integrated, or are they integrated? And as Mike was saying, we need to integrate them. So they need to be connected completely. So we've got a whole army of people that need to work together. We've got from volunteers to managers in a wildlife branch, and they all need to work together and understand each other. We have got in the IMS system, we can have industry or authorities. Again, they also need to be connected to that wildlife branch. So we need those roles that merge and connect each other so that they can work together and coordinate. So the next thing is integrating local or national and tier 3 preparedness. To have a successful response, there are several factors that need to be considered, and these are the different factors that we are depicting in this diagram. But it's key to have those factors at a local or national level preparedness. So that means a lot of effort in planning, in resources, in training and exercises, but it makes a difference. If all of those different sections in that pie are unknown or are not there, it becomes very, very difficult for those tier 3 experts to come and support. There might be many gaps and there might be many challenges for them to support. So the better you prepared locally and nationally, the better the outcome will be when a tier 3 response organization comes to support you, because then you will know who's coming, what they are doing, what they are supporting. And of course, there will be challenges and things to get fixed, but the basis will be there and it will be much, much easier and smoother. Design, test, and share meaningful exercises. We have been talking all through this conference that there are no incidents and we are missing those incidents to learn from. But we have to try to exercise and mimic those real scenarios so that we are more prepared. We have to select the right type of exercises as well. We go from functional exercises to discussion-based exercises. You can make them as big as you want, small and big. But we also have to bear in mind that we have to define clearly what the objectives of those exercises are. You need to think about your audience. You need to think about the skills of that audience and the knowledge that they have. Those exercises can be related to a plan, or maybe you are just exercising to further develop a plan or start a plan. And you can also do exercises to focus on certain things, test things, explore, whatever you want, but exercising is key. And one thing we have learned in the last years is that using visual and engaging and aligning tools are key for those exercises. So get your methodologies out and try to innovate and do new types of exercises so that people get those messages across quite easy. Another key principle is learning from response. As we were saying, less incidents, but we've got decades of responses and we've got lots of lessons learned from those incidents. So it's key to capture those lessons from every incident, regardless if they are small or big. If they have been successful or they have not been successful, they are failures, but from failures we learn and there are lessons learned. And from those lessons you create further development, you can innovate and you can move forward and see what fixes those lessons learned. And one of the things that we wanted to highlight, and it's quite close to us, this incident about Gibel in 2018 in Brussels, is the collaboration. So from there is that you can collaborate, you can integrate your different response organizations. So in that one, in the Netherlands, we had, as Simone was explaining this morning, different rehab centers in the Netherlands that are coordinated by Son Response. They had the incident, they called up upon requests for support to Euroa, also Davos partners, and they were all together working and collaborating and working through international standards as well on the same line. So they were all aligned. So we've got challenges ahead. What challenges? A diverse world. So locations, spill can happen anywhere. So, and we recognize that, and we saw the lines of the shipping industry, etc. They can happen anywhere. And funny enough, I had 3 pictures there, but I was coming Sunday through with my plane. Well, with my plane. We'll have a plane. going from the saw that on the window. I mean, the first picture. I mean, it's here next door, and I don't know where it is, and maybe people from South Africa will know. I think it wasn't South Africa yet, but anyway, I immediately thought, oh, that's the picture for my slide. I mean, how are you on earth going to respond to that location? I mean, you see all the. I mean, there are even 2-3 islands in front of it. Like how? Anyway, locations very diverse. Cultural aspects. I mean, every country is different culturally, and the culture will condition as well our activities in response. Political circumstances. Not all the countries have the same feeling about wildlife response or environmental policies. So we also need to be aware of that. Every country is different. And biodiversity. How many animals do we have? I mean, it's countless. I mean, it's impossible to assess. Marine animals, but also inland animals, safe and unsafe animals. So we all need to be aware of that, the diversity around the world. And then a fast changing world, that's the other thing. And also been told, that's the wrong thing of having your speak at the end of the conference, that so many things have been already mentioned, but climate change, extreme weather events, rising sea level, energy transition, so Mike Short was also talking about it, versus renewable energies, but also alternative fuels, geopolitical circumstances, new styles of political leadership, national, regional conflicts. How do we deal with that as well? And other aspects like technological aspects, AI, viruses, etc. So what is the future of oil wildlife response? First of all, oil wildlife response resources are lacking. So there are less incidents, so there is less investment into those resources and resources in general. So it's not just for oil wildlife response, so we need to be aware of that. That means less resources also means less experience for us because we cannot train, we cannot experience, etc. And also big impact for new generations. But oil is not disappearing. I mean, we still have oil for a while, and I think that's a fact. Energy transition is there, but it's slow. So it's moving, and we have to be prepared, but it's slow. So oil is still there, and it's the main propulsion system for most of the existing fleet in the world at the moment. So we still need to be prepared. So how do we cope with that? Lack of resources, lack of investment, but still oil is there. Climate change. So we were saying more extreme weather events, changes in species, habitat changing. So that all impacts our scenarios when we are responding. But that climate change is also forcing to alternative fuels, new infrastructures, new transport routes. Again, a risk that is increasing for us. And then new risks, other HNS products, other viruses. So we have been talking, we had a session on avian influenza, but what else can come? We don't know. So we need to focus wildlife also on those risks and research and development on those risks. So how to keep going? Redefine oiled wildlife response in a changing world. So we all know how to respond to oil, more or less. We are adaptable. We can improvise, of course, depending on the scenarios, depending on the circumstances. But how do we get prepared for the avian influenza? And as we were saying, there was a whole session in this conference on that. So we are already moving, so that's great. But alternative fuels, I don't know. We just had a session as well, one talk, but maybe next EOW, we might have to enlarge that and have more experiences on that. Climate change, other unknown risks, and AI is quite a one that I'm a little bit concerned, but it's moving so fast. How is that going to integrate into wildlife response? Can we, in a few years, just tell AI or ChatGPT or Copilot, whatever it is, to organize the workflow in a response? We don't know. I mean, it could be. What about the plans, preparedness plans? How are those going to be coping with AI as well? I mean, we don't know if what we are reading came from AI or not. So we also need to be aware of that and how is that impacting our job. Stay connected and share. So different levels. So we've got a global community, we've got Gowers on top, but they have to be connected with all the different regional communities as well. So Euroa in Europe, but any other regional network that might appear in the rest of the world. So we are not unique in the world. And all these regions also need to be connected to the different countries they belong to. And you can have countries less or more prepared, doesn't matter, but you have to stay connected. And each country as well, they have other resources below them. So all of them need to be connected in sharing good practice and innovation at all levels. It's not moving, Mike. Oh, sorry. Exercise, exercise, exercise. Create and participate in innovative and meaningful exercises in absence of incidents. And be innovative. I mean, exercises, they don't need to be the same. Use new methodologies, new scenarios. Get out of the box, get out of your comfort zone. Try to exercise things like going to different countries. And I know that's difficult because we don't have the resources for it, but different countries, different species, different languages, different stakeholders. So try to exercise with every single option that you have, because that's the oddest option that you will pick. That's the one you will get tomorrow in your incident. So to conclude, there's great progress in our wildlife preparedness and response, and we have to be aware of that. So we are all here, we are moving on. Industry authorities and NGOs have made huge steps forward, but still we need to keep moving. Challenges still exist, and future doesn't look easy, but the oil wildlife response community needs to adapt to what comes ahead, redefine oil wildlife response, keep pushing for further developments and resources, be prepared in absence of incidents, train and exercise, so that's the rule for us at the moment, and work together and share. And that's why we are here with the EOW. We are working together, we are sharing, and we are small, big community, I would say, but I think we have to be together and keep progressing. So that's me. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Daniela. An amazing talk. Next, we have Deneen Bertel. Deneen holds a BS in Biology and Marine Science from Rutgers University. She traveled as a volunteer to South Africa to support the treasure oil spill and discovered her passion for wildlife rehabilitation. Deneen then earned her AS in veterinary technology, and in 2007, joined the Tri-State Bird Rescue and Research Team. She remained there until 2018, when she was hired as the readiness coordinator for the Oil Wildlife Care Network, and currently acts as the OWCN Senior Manager of Wildlife Planning. Deneen.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, can everybody hear me okay? Awesome. Good afternoon and good day to everybody online. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the Gowers Assessment Team, take you through a journey, really focusing on the development and kind of the readiness that goes behind the Gowers Assessment Team. So just for those who may not know, we'll start with, what is Gowers? So Gowers is an international network of affiliated wildlife emergency response organizations who represent a unified voice for preparedness and response activities. These organizations are spanned throughout the world: North America, South America, Europe, UK, New Zealand, and South Africa. And we've been working together for just over a decade. So I really, like I said, I want to take you on a journey through the assessment team, about the assessment team, and also just kind of the readiness that goes into us being prepared to deploy. So when it comes to the assessment team, yes, we're focusing on that, but we also worry about and we think about all the different response phases. So preparedness, that's really done with the Gowers Steering Group. And then we have notification, and that's going to come through OSRL, through the existing SLA. And I promised Frankie I would mention the duty manager, so that's for you, Frankie. And then also activation would be via OSRL or other entity. And then we have the Gowers Assessment Team. If we should recommend to deploy an operational response, then that would be led by one of the Gowers member organizations. And then there's always the evaluation and after action that we will do to better inform future planning and preparedness. So a little bit about what is a wildlife assessment. So wildlife assessment is critical during the initial phases of an oil spill to provide insight into the scope and scale of an incident from the wildlife perspective. And that may be different than the overall response. So we're going to focus on the wildlife. Part of this assessment will include an evaluation of immediate wildlife impacts based on factors such as species in the area, at the time of year, concentrations of animals, habitat, terrain, and various other factors. We will also evaluate capacity. So we're going to look at capacity at the local level, the regional level, and we're going to also consider existing response plans, country-specific legal requirements, looking at things like permitting and laws around practicing veterinary medicine, wildlife capture and care, and other factors. The assessment will also indicate if an operational response is feasible and necessary, and we will provide recommendations. So in a nutshell, the assessment team service will provide advice and recommendations on the resources that may be needed and how to source them. And this is going to be based on real-time data that is obtained during this boots on the ground assessment, where we are going to really gather information and then make recommendations. So the best way to do this, the Gowers member organizations have been working together, and they've determined that this 4-person assessment team will be able to cover that ground and provide those recommendations. So that team consists of an ops or planning specialist, a field assessment specialist, a facility and animal care specialist, and excuse me, a veterinarian or incident specific specialist. And I just want to kind of emphasize that role a little bit, because it's one of the most valuable roles in this 4-person team, because it really can fill a specific space that complements and supports the other positions. So a little bit about the 4 roles. I'm going to start on the left. So we have the wildlife ops and planning specialist. And this individual works within the client's incident management system, coordinates with the wildlife branch director, and really works to fortify that command structure. They're going to complete necessary reporting, documentation, and also help formulate those recommendations. Moving to the right, the field and capture specialist. This individual will assess the spill site dynamics, looking at local species. Are there experts in the area? What experts might be needed? They're going to look at real-time reconnaissance and also recommend capture, hazing, deterrence techniques, and what might be the requirements to conduct those activities. Moving down to the wildlife rehab facility specialist. So this is really going to look at local capacity. Are there local wildlife care providers? They're going to look at facility options. Are there existing facilities, or might we need to recommend sourcing a remote facility? Also looking at permits, protocols, existing agreements that are already in the area, and then they're going to recommend what resources might be necessary. And then finally, back to the incident-specific specialist, which can also be a veterinarian. And this is tailored to really support the rest of the team. And this individual might bring taxa-specific information. They may have knowledge on the local area, cultural aspects of that area, veterinary resources that might be needed. And they're going to really recommend some of those specific resources around those areas. So a little bit about how we got here. So we know the roles. So the prerequisites in the training, one of the first things that we had to do was really establish baseline prerequisites and what was the training going to look like for this assessment team. So first we'll start with what is the baseline. Baseline is 24 hours of oil and gas industry approved health and safety training. Also working knowledge of the Gowers standard operating procedures. Incident command system or / incident management system training, depending on your locality. Prior documented experience as an oil wildlife response manager or supervisor in a tier 2 or tier 3 incident. Completion of the Gowers assessment team training, which has been created by Gowers. Also, the OWRT training, and if you want to learn more about OWRT, they do have a table. I know we don't have much time left. Hopefully you spoke with them already. And then also really outlining required vaccinations and then recommended vaccinations. So these, again, were kind of the baselines that have been established. Then we had to look at criteria. How are we going to look at criteria for the assessment team? So we started with knowledge of skills and abilities and experiential qualifiers. How are we going to qualify these responders? We also had to look at documented wildlife response and leadership experience on tier 2 and tier 3 responses. So what we did was we formed a working group and we really looked at what tier 2, tier 3 responses have individuals been on, and then how are we going to qualify them? How are we going to, so we ended up giving those incident spill complexity scores, and we really looked deep into the incidents, the duration of the incident, where was the incident, how complex was the incident. And then individuals had to qualify by a minimum of 3 responses per those roles. Then we had to look at the individual experience. How are we going to quantify that? So we had the spill complexity score that we talked about, and then we had to look at the individual's roles and how are we going to quantify that information? How long were they there? What role or roles did they play during those responses? Different types of species. So really looking at complexities to help quantify these things. And each position has their own individual criteria for each of the positions, which really helps us with the assessment team selection process. On to preparedness, additional tools for preparedness. I already mentioned training and experience, so that's really, really important. We also have regular meetings internally as a steering group, and also our working groups are working together. Like I said, we are global, so we really have to find time to work together, and planning those meetings is always, it's creative in itself. We have a small window of opportunity. And New Zealand usually ends up getting the short straw of time. Sorry, Louise. Also working regular meetings internally and then also with OSRL to maintain that connectivity. We have a community of practice, and that's really our liaison to industry. And then we have the assessment team training and qualification tracking that you kind of seen a little bit of on the previous slide. How are we going to track and maintain all this information for these individuals? We've also created a RACI matrix, and that really is looking at all the different responsibilities when it comes to mobilization, activation, and how are we and who is responsible for specific things such as determining vaccinations, mobilization procedures, who's going to create the go bags and what do we need in our go bags. And this really just assigns responsibilities to those specific areas. All right, mobilization. So like I said, we have an SOP that we follow. And you're looking at this chart. We have a few flow charts like this one. And you might say, well, it's a little more complex than I initially thought. It is. So let me break it down just a little bit. So mobilization, I'm going to talk about notification and activation. So it's going to come via call 8, which is, some of you may be familiar with call 8. So it is a hotline and we will receive a call. The call will go through to the Gowers coordinator from OSRL or another party. And then the Gowers coordinator will obtain the information and they will reach out to the Gowers members via multi-bell. Now, if any of you have experienced multi-bell, it wakes you up. Thank you, Sasha. Once they get all of the critical information, that information will be shared to the Gowers steering group. Again, following the Gowers SOP, we will then work with the coordinator. We'll then convene the strategic meeting. We will meet via Zoom. Again, this won't be in person, and the strategic team will be the one meeting at that point. They will solicit nominations for the assessment team, and then the assessment team will be selected via consensus. So let's go into that just a little bit more. Before that strategic meeting, we will get the critical information on the incident, We will also fill out an individual availability form, and that form is going to really collect information. Are you available? Do you have the vaccinations? Do you speak the primary language in the country? So it's gonna solicit information, which will then go into, it'll all go through the web into a nice spreadsheet for us to be able to look at to help us select assessment team members and also to be able to nominate individuals. We will ask for nominations. Who might be good representatives from the organizations to go on this assessment? From there, the strategic meeting, which I already mentioned, we'll get an incident briefing. We're really going to discuss, is this a go or no-go situation? Gowers has pillars, and they're looking at safety and feasibility of response. Is there a local team? So we are going to have just a little bit of a discussion and then talk through that. And then at that point, if we decide that we want to continue to move forward, the nominations will be presented. There'll be a nomination round. We'll talk about previous experience. Have you been on a previous assessment team? There will be a discussion round. And then finally, we will make the final selection of that 4-person team. In true response readiness, we will also have a contingency plan. We will also select 4 alternates, just in case somebody may not be able to get a visa to go to that specific country, or they may unexpectedly become unavailable to travel. At that point, we'll select a team lead. So this 4-person team will have a team lead, and then we will begin the mobilization procedures. So the initial deployment, we will follow, like I said, we'll follow the SOP. There will be a pre-deployment briefing. We're going to work to define objectives based on the information that we have. We're going to consult the RACI matrix, which is on the slide here. We're going to look at travel booking, working through OSRL, travel insurance. What are the visa requirements? And not only the visa requirements for where we're going, but also for where individuals are coming from. It's not going to be the same for each of us because we'll be coming potentially from different countries going into a specific area. We'll work through the statement of intent, make sure that gets signed, and that we're all in agreement, and then we will prepare for deployment. Each one of the member organizations has a go bag, and then we will also look at vaccinations that the individuals have and what might be needed to go to that specific area. So it is a little complex, and it can be, we really have to look at a lot of factors. So once we get mobilized, initial in-country actions, we're going to have an in-country meet and greet. We will ask for a liaison, and that could be an industry representative, some type of security, or both potentially. We'll have an on-site briefing and really start to gather information, and that will work into an assessment action plan. And then at the end of each day, we'll make sure we create a daily report that looks a little bit like this. So in summary, it has been a journey. It started with the assessment team working group, I believe around 2018, if I'm not mistaken. And what we had to do is we really had to define what were those assessment team positions, the 4 of which you've just learned about. Then we had to establish those qualifications. What knowledge, skills, and abilities were required? What were going to be the criteria to be on the assessment team? And then we had to collect and analyze the data from all of the individuals within each of the organizations. From there, we had to develop and test the selection process, and we went through this. We did a lot of internal exercises, working through different countries, different incidents, and how are we going to select individuals, and what were these mobilization processes going to look like. And now we have a service that is ready to be tested and deployed. And we really, really encourage exercising, using those exercise days, and really thinking about how this really important part of an incident is vital to moving forward with recommendations for a response, especially in areas where we might not have that preparedness or the capability or capacity. So with that, I want to say thank you to my co-author, Louise Chilvers, and also to Jenny Schleeps and Adam Grogan, who also gave me some insight for this presentation. Thank you to the EOW Program Committee for inviting us to talk about the assessment team, and also to OSRL. And that is it.
Thank you so much, Deneen. Our next presentation is co-led by Daniela and Sasha Regman. Sasha is an expert in wildlife rehabilitation, including oil wildlife rescue and treatment. Sasha has been involved in European programs to professionalize oil wildlife response since 2006. He is a founder of ocean protection organization Project Blue Sea, ongoing since 2000, and he is part of the board of directors. In 2014, he also founded the network organization ProBird EV, of which he is the managing director. He was key in the EU-funded EOW module project, developing guidelines and technical content for several of the EOW manuals. He's one of the key experts of the EOW and the Gowers response teams. So please.
Hello. So nice to be here. A lot of people here. I'm a little bit nervous, but we will manage that in the end. Okay, so now you have heard a lot of things about the Gowers, the international network, but we are also having a network within Europe. And I will tell you some more details about this network briefly. So, what is EOW? So EOW stands for European Oiled Wildlife Assistance, and it was initiated in 2015. We are having 14 network members in 11 European countries. 11 out of those network members are associated members, and then we have 3 affiliated members. And we are having 2 brand new members, which is KFV from Sweden, and also the Scottish PCA. And within our national networks, so for example, in France and in the Netherlands and in Germany, we have additional 23 organizations under our umbrella. So it's quite a lot of people that are working with us. And we have an equipment stockpile. I will go later back to that issue. Our office is the Sea Alarm, or Secretariat is the Sea Alarm office in Brussels. And yeah, our mission is to support and empower EU authorities and NGOs and polluters in dealing professionally with oiled wildlife using agreed international standards. That's what we have on our flag. So as you see on this, we have been quite busy in Europe in the first decade of this century with a lot of spills and a lot of mystery spills as well. And you see above all those EOW member organizations have worked on several spills, not all on the same time, on the same spill. But there are 2 spills that have been something like a turning point, I would say, is the tricolor spill in 2003 in Belgium. We have been overwhelmed with thousands of oiled birds at one place, and this was the first thing that the first time that we were thinking we need to come together, because it's simply not doable if we leave the Belgians alone with this situation. And after the tricolor spill, we built up a pool of expertise in Europe without any funding. So we spent a lot of money into to travel to different places to meet together. And that was the first turning point, that we brought expertise together. And the second turning point, I would say, it was the 2009 spill in Norway, the full city. And there you see on the map, Sea Alarm was involved, NOAA, the Norwegians, RSPCA, the Belgian people, ProBird, and also some other individuals. And after that spill, we sat together and we said we have to do a group, not just the pool of expertise, but we have to define a project and we have to develop a lot of materials so that we will be prepared better in the future. Yeah, how is the EOW set up? I think the heart, or the point in the middle, is our charter that we have developed. So all our partners or the members, they have to agree with this charter, and we are also having SOPs and stuff like this that we are guaranteeing an international standard in oiled wildlife rehabilitation. So what can EOW provide? So we are having, as said, this pool of expertise, bringing people together, and we are having a lot of people after all those years. And with best practice standards, internationally standards, we have a bunch of trainings and also equipment. And now let's go step by step. So let's start with the pool of expertise. And the equipment, our equipment is also stored in Belgium, close to Ostende. And this is 2.5 tons of equipment. We are having 9 pools and filters and everything else what you will need for an wildlife response, field equipment as well. And we are doing regularly checks with this equipment. It's once in a year we are going to this place and we are checking the equipment. So, as said, we have developed a lot of trainings in the past couple of years, and there are different aspects. So we are having a lot of hands-on response trainings, and it starts with the basic course, which is a 1-day course. And then the second one is an advanced course, which is a 4-day course. And then we have also developed different specialist courses, which are 3 days in the end. So we have now in our portfolio, we are having a field specialist course, we're having a pre-wash course, and now we are developing a post-wash course, which will be there in the beginning of 2026. But also we are having scientific training courses. It's about risk and impact assessment on specialist level. And we are also having this manager courses and Yoruba-specific team member assessment team trainings. And aside, we have developed a lot of booklets, and we spent a lot of time in that. But with that, I think we are now on the safe place, so that we can also guarantee, and also during the trainings, we can keep the quality very high. So, and with that, I hand over to my dear colleague, Daniela.
Thank you, Sasha. So I'm going to talk about the latest Yoruba developments. We've been busy the last years. So this is the Yoruba 2 project that we run from 2021 to 2022, together with WWF Finland, Submon in Spain, and the NIOS Institute in the Netherlands. Lots done. Lots of deliverables. Few highlights, new website. So we managed to get a new website for Yoruba. Lots of trainings developed. So risk and impact assessment, managers courses, specialist courses. So we developed 2 specialist courses during that project. Guidelines for exercise development. They are free on the website to download. So if you have need any guidance on how to exercise, go there. And there are lots of examples. The Wildex tabletop exercise that EOW was presenting yesterday as well, that was the origin of that one, was in the Yoruba 2 project. With the funding from the Commission as well, because obviously I didn't say it, but the Yoruba 2 was EU funded. We managed to get the network together, which is also key to get together. We did the equipment inspection. We did workshops with authorities, which was key in Europe as well to raise that awareness and keep raising that awareness. We delivered lots of training events from all courses and new developed courses. And we also developed the new Euro branch for sea turtles, which was a breakthrough in the network as well. So we created a basic and an advanced course for Yoruba sea turtles together with the protocol. And then EuroWild. So EuroWild is the project that we are running currently, also EU funded through the Erasmus Plus project program. That Erasmus Plus program focuses on education and training in Europe. So the project is run together with WWF Finland, Submon, Wildlife Rehab Center in Ostend, and also ProBird. Again, new training courses developed. So the field specialist course that Sasha was mentioning, the post-wash course is going to be developed. We are having a network meeting next month, yay, in Spain. Train the Trainer course is going to be developed. The online basic course recently finished. Workshops with European authorities again. We think that's key to have in Europe, and the assessment team training. So we are also developing an assessment team manual and course package. And just a few pictures of the specialist course. So that was run last April. The course itself was led by my dear colleague Sasha Probert, together with Richard Thompson from the RSPCA. So we delivered the course last April in Germany, and 14 people got qualified on that course. And then also the basic online wildlife responder course. This is just an adaptation of the basic course that we currently, or we've had for a few years, but we have adapted it to have it online. And again, it was a collaborative effort. So Mariluz from Submon in Spain was leading the work package, but all the trainers from the Euroa network were collaborating into that and providing trained videos with lessons on the different units in the course. So we think Euroa is a unique regional solution. And why do we say that? It's a regional network of NGOs with international response capability. They provide mutual assistance for Europe, but also international response support if needed. Each of the organizations, they are their own tier 1 preparedness tool in their country, but they also act as tier 3 because they can support countries nearby in Europe, nearby or not nearby, but they can be supporting other countries as well. And they all get the support from the Euroa Secretariat run by CLM. One of the key things in the network is trust, respect, and collaboration. So we get on really well, we work together, and we move forward as a group. It's an open network membership, so anybody can join, and the aim is to get as many organizations as possible in the coastal countries of Europe. There are no membership fees, so it's self-funded, and as Sasha was saying, it's be a commitment in our own fundings. Whenever we can, we get support from the EU, so we get EU projects and we try to run for them. And the secretariat functions are also run in kind. The network has a coherent vision on professionalism and mutual assistance, so we also have SOPs, internal and external, for authorities in Europe. We've got a standardized training system based on good practice manuals. In that training system, you can follow different training paths, whether it is hands-on training or managerial training. And they go bottom-up, as Sasha was saying. You start with your basic qualifications, but you move to advanced, specialists, or managers. And the top levels are only achieved by lifelong learning experience. So that's also key, that we have the top levels with really experts in the field. There are formal qualifications, so the Secretariat keeps a central registration of everybody that has been trained, and there's quality control. And it all works with a train-the-trainer system, so if you get a qualification, you can always train the level below. And this is just a few figures of the numbers that we are dealing with in the Euroa network. So we have trained, or we have in our database, 1,057 responders that have been trained in different countries, and you can see the numbers there. Also, the number of training events. So we've been consistent from 2015 to 2025, big peak down in 2020 due to COVID, but keeping there in the trainings. And obviously the number of qualifications gained keep increasing. And at the moment we've got 1,469 qualifications provided. What type of training events are we providing? As you can see in the graph, obviously, the basic training is the most popular, but we keep going up. So we've also have the advanced, and then you have less and less on the higher qualifications, but that's because people have to go through the whole thing. So we have a continuous and structured preparedness investment. We have a work plan. We have activities to develop as much as we can, I have to say, because as we were saying, the funding is limited, but we try to have that multi-year program of things that we want to achieve. We've got the published guidelines and standards, and we try to update them whenever is possible. So in the last Euroa 2 project, we just did an update, a revamp of all of them. Training and exercise development, we keep training, and we keep developing material for the network. And also the network has different technical committees, and we get together and we discuss and we exercise. So we try to identify as much as we can gaps and needs to move forward and be better prepared. One big thing is that it is recognized, the Euroa network is recognized by the EU and the regional agreement. So the European Commission has got the Euroa network in their system, in their what they call the Emergency Response Coordination Center. So we are listed as a resource there. And we can be mobilized by different countries via Belgium, because that's where we are registered in, but we can be mobilized to different countries in Europe. And there are also discussions to register EUROA as a pool of experts in Europe. So the EUROA expert network has been recognized by different regional agreements, the Helsinki Convention, the Bonn Agreement, and the Barcelona Convention, as the expert network for mutual assistance in Europe. Few highlights there. HELCOM, they have an expert group for wildlife response. CLM is chairing that group. And they also have WWF Finland as observer in their meetings together with CLM. The Bonn Agreement, also a big breakthrough last week. They are creating an expert group on wildlife response. So CLM suggested to have the same structure as we had in HELCOM. And last week we heard that Belgium is willing to lead that expert group. So good news for us as well. And then the Barcelona Convention. CLM has got an MOU with REMPEC, and obviously CLM is directly connected to EUROA. So whatever country in the REMPEC region under the Barcelona Convention has got a need for support on preparedness and response, EUROA or CLM will be there supporting those countries. So national preparedness. In the last years, we've had lots of workshops, trainings, meetings, and webinars with different European countries. And we think most of them have now a clear technical picture of what is available, what your professional wildlife response looks like, how authorities can be developing and implementing that preparedness, and how EUROA can be assisting. There are 4 countries in Europe that have got, at the moment, governmental funding and multi-year programs. One is the Netherlands. So Simone was talking all around the Netherlands this morning. Finland also have got a program that allows them to carry on trainings and exercises every year. Estonia, a little bit more intermittent funding, but also doing some activities. And Germany, and Jessica Ram from the Havari Commando was talking about this morning as well. They have done a lot of progress in the last year on preparedness planning, and they are expecting to start an implementation program of that plan in the next years. Other countries making also good progress: Belgium, Poland, Spain, UK. A bit less, but making progress. So what are the challenges ahead? Funding, as always, funding. EU funding is not continuous, so we have to fight every year or every 2-3 years for proposals and putting good proposals, good ideas, and get them accepted. So far, we've been managing, but might not be the case in the next years. Funding also for the network, because we need to stay together. So we need that funding to keep on preparedness, response, etc. But also the different individual organizations need to find fundings at national level so that they are prepared in their own country and for their own country. The other challenge, and I'm not going to repeat that, absence of field experience. So we need to keep going, doing courses, exercises, preparedness, and trying to qualify our responders as much as possible so that when it happens, they are prepared. And then the new generations, of course. So we have to engage with new people that have to learn and understand what the issue is. And it's key also to have them on board from day one, because we all keep moving and the experience is disappearing in a way, but we need to keep teaching the people that are coming behind us. So conclusions. EUROA, a unique and well-established professional preparedness and response structure in Europe. The EU funding granted has contributed immensely to create a solid system of standards, training, and accreditation, and also the authority engagement, so that funding has allowed us also to raise that awareness in Europe. EUROA is embedded into regional agreements and recognized in an increasing number of countries as the regional own wildlife response solution. So we are there. A regional model worldwide with internationally recognized response structure, integration principles, a solid training system, continuous preparedness efforts, and as many of you guys, conditioned by some well-known limiting factors, funding and field experience. So let's keep on with that and keep pushing to get that funding and field experience. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. And lucky last presentation for the conference, Jenny Schleeps. Jenny began working with wildlife in and has specialized in oil wildlife response and rehabilitation since 2008. She's worked with a large range of bird, mammal, and reptile species and specializes in the care of aquatic and pelagic birds. She is the Senior Manager of Wildlife Response Preparedness for Focus Wildlife International and currently serves as the Chair of the Global Oil Wildlife Response System, or GOWRS. In addition to her work with Focus, she is the Publications Manager for the National Wildlife Rehabilitators Association and editor for the NWRA Open Access Journal, the Wildlife Rehabilitation Bulletin. Jenny.
Thank you, Mike. I'm very pleased to be able to be in this prized position of the last talk of the conference. It's amazing. So as Mike mentioned, I'm here to talk about GOWRS and the sort of rather vague session title of where we have been and where we are going. But the underlying theme about it is the long arc of international collaboration. For many of us, collaboration is not particularly easily defined, and certainly not so within the realm of oil to wildlife response. It can change over time, and the goals for collaboration can change over time depending on the needs and the individuals involved in that collaborative effort. We often can't define it very well, but we all feel like we know what it is when we see it. And in trying to collaborate together and work together, it can be somewhat difficult to hit what feels like a moving target. I'm going to take you back to some of the early years, before GOWRS was GOWRS, so things that we term as sort of the coalition or as the alliance. And there are some people in this very room, and I'm looking at you, Valeria, in particular, but some other people who were involved in these efforts and have been since 1995, right? So there were a series of meetings that were quite important to these beginning conversations around collaboration, what collaboration could look like, and the need for collaboration. And one of those was a meeting at what I believe is the third EOW conference in 1995 that took place in Seattle, Washington on the west coast of the United States. There was recognition at that time of the need for international response cooperation. And particularly that conversation started with Lynn Frank, who was then the executive director of Tri-State Bird Rescue, Bird Research and Rescue now. But really that conversation between responders about the need for international collaboration and the need to work together and what the process and purpose could be of that collaboration. That was followed by two other meetings that were quite important in the year 2000, the first being a meeting that was held at RSPCA. It was just called the International Oiled Bird Meeting. It took place in Sussex in England. And that was followed by the International Oil Spill Conference in Tampa, right in Myrtle Beach in Florida in the southeast of the US. And those really developed into these very broad conversations around coalition of responders. And again, this focus on how we can share the load, how we can come together in these large events. Year 2000, of course, is familiar to all of us because we're also here discussing the 25th anniversary of the Treasure oil spill. So along with this conversation that was ongoing around international collaboration was also within that time frame, the Treasure oil spill happening. Beginning in 2000, there was sort of an informal, functional group of people working as the Alliance. So they were working on bylaws, protocols for animal care, protocols for response, and animal care standards, really looking at things that would professionalize the field, even though it was not a formally incorporated organization at that point. In 2003, there was, again, you can see these 3-year gaps that are always around the conference cycles, either EOW or International Oil Spill Conference. So this is when we get together, and this is another reminder of how critically important these meetings are to all of us to move things forward and to professionalize this field as much as we can. So in 2003, there were again the International Oil Spill Conference in Vancouver, British Columbia on the west coast of Canada, and the Effects of Oil on Wildlife Conference in Hamburg, Germany. It was at the Hamburg meeting that bylaws were developed and the International Alliance of Wildlife Responders was really born. One thing holds true from the beginning of those conversations in '95 to today is that Gowers is terrible at acronyms. That's how we came up with, in the early days, the IAOWR and now the GOWRS. So we have not learned our lesson from that one. But in 2005, the alliance, as it is sort of shorthand known, was officially incorporated as this new fledgling organization. So in those early years, starting in 2006, you can see these are part of the, these next two slides I'm going to show you are the written purposes and the objectives of the organization. So focus on high standards of practice, high standards for ethics and conduct, professionalization of the field, dissemination of knowledge, particularly through publications and symposia, and looking at cooperation, professionalism, and working with governmental agencies, industry, and the scientific community. So things that Gowers as an entity is still involved in today. The objectives, as it was written here, and these are directly from the bylaws that Mike luckily shared with me, develop and maintain guidelines for best practices in world wildlife response. That's something that Gowers has also worked on. Expanding communication among world wildlife responders, industry, government, and the scientific community. Again, looking at best practices in world wildlife care, looking at research and development. Provide a unified voice for world wildlife responders. That particular sentence is still in the mission statement and the collaboration agreement of Gowers, right? That is held true from that initial conversation in 1995 through to now. Along with these other objectives were strategies to limit damage to wildlife, again, international preparedness, still very much the focus of what we do, and human health and safety. Those early years were a little unstable, as they are for all young organizations. So 2006 and 2007, they started working on this really very large board structure, something that looked a little bit more like the way that we see typical nonprofit boards formed. So there was a broad group of international responders, and the focus of the organization was really on membership and developing different types of membership, both for individuals and for organizations, bringing members into the organization, having symposia, working on publications, and a real integrative approach to collaboration. Unfortunately, there was a lack of funding, as so often happens with these collaborative efforts and nonprofit organizations, and that led to the dissolution of the Alliance in 2009. So there were, unfortunately, things did not happen in the way that we had hoped. So what happens next, right? We move in these collaborative efforts, and then these sort of, you run into a wall or get taken out by a needle as it happens. So what are your next options? Again, 3 years later, there was a pretty critical meeting that happened at Interspill in 2012 in London. It was a series of industry partners and OSRL that met with responders, including Sea Alarm Foundation, the World Wildlife Care Network, SANCOB, International Bird Rescue, and the RSPCA. And during that meeting, it was sort of a key milestone where there was a discussion about, again, the need for this collaborative effort. So there were terms of reference and a proposal that were developed in 2013 and submitted to this joint industry project. The project was funded in 2013 and then fully approved in what's known as the JIP 20 within 2015. That became known as the Gowers Project. So at the time, we were not formalized, we were not incorporated. It was simply the beginning of the Gowers Project. So the Gowers Project had a period of about 5 or 6 years where we were really focused on a couple of specific things. In phase 1 of this JIP-funded project was really looking at creating an international framework for Tier 3 world wildlife response. So again, this focus on standards, procedures, government arrangements, readiness systems, a way that we could ensure that we had something that would focus, function for both industry and for response partners, right? So it had to meet the needs of both communities in order to be functional in an international Tier 3 framework. There is a second piece, so that the first phase of that project was from 2015 to 2016. The second phase was from 2017 to 2021. So it covered the period we all forget, which is when COVID hit to when it sort of didn't leave us, but those years between 2020 and 2023 that nobody can make sense of, including me. There were two other sets of goals within this project that were really looked at to be an industry piece that was supposed to be achieved by industry and the stakeholders. And those were really around support and planning and preparedness for Tier 1 and Tier 2 responders. So in-country planning to define the limits and the capabilities of Tier 1 and Tier 2 resources, and then preparedness to ensure that any response could be scaled appropriately, along with training and exercises to test that ability and to really look at preparedness as a whole. The other piece that was industry-led was the promotion of good practice, right? And this was done with industry in a collaborative way, but raising awareness among all stakeholders and ensuring integration of new and existing oil spill plans and activities. Okay, there were some specific outputs or deliverables that happened during that period, and many of you are familiar, I think, with the IPCA guide. Daniela had it in her slides, as did Sasha. So there were two IPCA good practice guides that were put out, one on preparedness, wildlife response preparedness, and the second one, which is a set of internationally agreed upon animal care standards called the Key Principles for the Protection and Care of Animals in Wildlife Response, World Wildlife Response. That was a very significant milestone for the Gowers Project as a whole, and took a great deal of work for us to pull together, because even now, but specifically at that time, you're really looking at 10 organizations coming together with their own sets of protocols, understanding regional specific things that have to determine really what the best standard is for everybody that can be used globally. That is a very difficult project, and one that was worked at really hard within this period. Also between 2015 and 2021, there were a series of wildlife branch competencies that were defined around the functions of the role, the response roles. Recommendations were made for Tier 3 equipment stockpiles. What should be brought into the stockpile, how many days that might hold for, if it was for the first 48 or 24 hours of response. So it's really critical to have this piece of aligned information around wildlife branch response, equipment that would support the directives and support, or the objectives from the wildlife branch, and equipment that could support those first 48 hours of response. And then there were additionally guidance materials for industry. And again, all of this was focused on a framework for oil wildlife response that would meet the requirements of both the wildlife responders and industry. Also in that time were some specific industry-aligned projects. So there were a number of industry exercises, including one in Malaysia in 2016. There was a meeting in Cyprus, which many of you are familiar with, so a workshop meeting in 2019, where there was the development, in large part from Hugo Nijkamp from Sea Alarm Foundation, for the preparedness wheel. So this is a wheel that sort of looks at planning into training and exercising to keep everybody sort of focused on moving forward. And then there was the initiation of the Wildlife Preparedness and Response Community of Practice, which is a community of practice under Oil Spill Response Limited. And the purpose of that community of practice really is to support and drive the implementation of tiered preparedness and to improve collaboration across the industry as a whole, as well as support effective integration of wildlife response expertise. So now we're in 2022, and Gowers is in a slightly different period. During this period, we signed a contract, a best effort contract with OSRL for a service level agreement for an assessment team. And Deneen did an excellent job of describing the assessment team function and the roles within the assessment team and its purpose. So I won't go into that too much, but I will just talk about it a little bit. So that assessment team has a specific purpose and a specific duration under the service level contract. So it is a team of 4 individuals that are highly qualified within oiled wildlife response and within the assessment phase that are ready to deploy at any time, 24/7. To assess the on-the-ground conditions. So really looking at what wildlife has been impacted, what is the risk to wildlife, what are the potential strategies, what are the opportunities for capture or deterrence and hazing, all of these pieces that feed into the response mechanism as a whole so that you understand the resources and the capability that you need to have to properly respond to it. So that functionality within the assessment team really is to evaluate the need and the feasibility of a Tier 3 response once Tier 1 and 2 capabilities have been exceeded, and then to work with the client to make sure that those can happen practically. So Deneen showed you this graphic, but these are again the 4 baseline positions: the wildlife ops and planning specialist, the field capture specialist, the veterinarian or incident specific specialist, and the rehabilitation and facility specialist. So we work together as a team to underscore the best efforts for the response. When we were looking in some sort of understanding of how we could move the assessment team forward, we looked at criteria, and Deneen talked about this a little bit. Deneen and I were both on the assessment team working group in developing this, and one of the key pieces about the assessment team was that there was a requirement for us to have quantitative criteria, not qualitative. So somebody couldn't just say they were qualified. We wanted to ensure that they had documented qualifications, right? So a couple of things that we looked at is how complex was the incident that they responded to, how many incidents did people respond to, whether there was a requirement for the number of Tier 2 or Tier 3 incident responses. How long were they in those roles, in those leadership positions? And then there were some baseline criteria. And then a whole lot of need for a bunch of math that came out and gave us a number that said, congratulations, you've met that criteria. Sasha Regman, as our expert in exercises, then pulls together with the exercise working group these teams that tell us and test the assessment team in a variety of really complex scenarios and situations to ensure that we're prepared. So within those exercises, we really work collaboratively with local Tier 1 and Tier 2 entities, local authorities, and other stakeholders to ensure that we have a global framework for the exercises and the tests that we run on our assessment team. We want as much experience in working with different people in collaboration across those boundaries to ensure that we really have a very well exercised assessment team. So in 2024, in February of 2024, Gowers was incorporated as an entity. So what does that mean for us in 2025 and beyond? There's a real focus for us on industry exercises and full incorporation of wildlife response into overall response objectives and operations. That's really critical, as Daniela mentioned. Exercises are a critical part of preparedness and are really necessary for us to move forward. We are continuing to work on preparedness activities for Tier 3 assessment and response, and continuing to really look at ways that we can collaborate with authorities, NGOs, related disciplines, and oiled wildlife response as a whole, and solidifying that collaboration both internally within Gowers as well as across all the boundaries. Collaboration is really key to everything that we do within oiled wildlife response. Organizations are much stronger when we work together than we are individually, and response is more effective when we work together. At the keynote, Anton Wolfart had a series of quotes, and I thought, being that this is the last talk of the day, that I would leave you with 2 of my favorites. And one is here, it's and I keep both of these on the window right where I work so I can look at them. One of them is by a woman named Miriam Kaba, who is a Chicago community organizer and abolitionist. And her constant reminder is that hope is a discipline. You have to choose every day for hope. And the other one I keep is this one by Grace Paley, which is the only recognizable feature of hope is action. And so I leave that now with you. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Jenny. A perfect way to end the spoken presentations. There is a panel afterwards, though, so, okay. If I can invite the speakers to come up back to the podium so they can answer questions and the camera can see you. Yes, we haven't done that in other sessions, but I'm in charge of this one, so I'm going to make you. While I get the handheld microphones going, I might ask Frankie if there's any questions from the online audience.
Yes, so there is a question from online.
I'm up to answer.
The first question is, how can oiled wildlife responders integrate with OSRL oil spill responders? Is GOWS part of the 5x5? How do wildlife responders integrate with OSRL's oil spill responders? I feel like this may be a question for myself. So, for those that don't know, OSRL has a 5x5 service, which is 5 responders free for 5 days. And life responders from GOWS and CLM are not part of that. We are integrating.
Here, I will take this. You take this. Yeah, you get that light.
So that's the answer. So they're not part of the 5x5, but we work very closely together to integrate wildlife response.
Yes. Now I give that back to you.
Anybody else have a question? While I try to fix the chat feature on Zoom at the same time. Other questions?
Frankie. This isn't a question for Frankie, I don't think, but standards that GOWS hasn't been recognized yet, but I understand you've done lots of practices. So what does that time frame look from having an instant notification, selecting your assessment team as your quantitative method, and mobilizing? So that's either boots on the ground or, I don't know, confirming airplane tickets or something like that. How's that looked like?
So the strategic team for GOWS is required to meet within 2 hours of notification. So we have 2 hours after notification to come together. And then within an hour of that strategic team, our goal is to make a decision about the most fit for purpose assessment team, right? So what members have the highest skill levels for where we're going, the species matrix, all of those sorts of events. The actual mobilization piece depends on whether we are given the go-ahead for mobilization, when the tickets are purposed. So we go through the duty manager at OSRL, and we go through their excellent Crisis 24 service to ensure that we can get tickets, get mobilized, get visas. So a lot of it depends on how quickly we can get on a plane. It's less related in some cases to our ability to get on a flight as to when the flights fly, where we're flying to. So potentially it could be 24 hours. It could be sooner, right? So one of the things that goes into it, did mention this in her presentation, is that incident specific specialist is often somebody who is in a country who speaks the language and has some existing relationship with tier 1 and tier 2. So that allows them to go on site quite rapidly. Do you mean if you have anything to add to that, or did that cover your? Yes. Thanks.
Frankie? Go ahead, Frankie.
I just want to add on to something that Jenny mentioned there. In a recent exercise, we simulated mobilizing GAWs and sea alarm to Brazil, and from not notification, but mobilization, once the client had said, yes, let's go, into country, it was 3 days, and sorry, it was actually to Guyana.
Okay, other questions from the audience? Other questions online?
How do international wildlife experts work with local NGOs during a spill?
It's a very small question. Why am I chair of GAWs at this particular moment? I think there are a number of ways that GAWs in particular, and I think CLM has a role there in terms of their relationship building with GMs. Certainly for us going in as the assessment team, if you're looking specifically at that, looking at local on the ground NGOs as partners in the response, who can provide us with information, data that we don't have, understand the greater context of the spill. That's certainly, I think, the first thing that we think of when we're looking at other NGOs. Do you want to?
Okay, and I think we may make this the last question because.
I'll just extend a little bit.
Sorry, did not see you there.
I think it's key as well to know if we are talking response or preparedness. So I think one of the key things is partnering with those small NGOs in preparedness time, in peacetime, so that we can work together a little bit better and more efficiently when response is on. But support is what we provide both. I mean, and GAWers doing their assessment moments, their assessment trip, being there with those organizations, Sea Alarm trying to support them as well in managing things that they might be doing. So collaborative effort, support, and assistance.
Yeah, it's not a question. It just kind of adding to Jenny comment on how GAWS interacts with NGOs. And I will talk from an example from recent exercise that ExxonMobil did. And we did exercise GAWS mobilization, had 4 GAWS members with us on the exercise, and even going to the remote areas to assess the area. And this is a responsible party or entity kind of responsibility to make sure that they get the network of local NGOs, additional to whatever GAWS has their existing network, but on the ground have these networks and facilitate the connection between GAWS and NGOs as what happened at that time.
Great, thanks, Tanya. With that, I think I'm going to close this session. Please give a final round of applause. We now have a 15-minute break, so enough time to get up, get a cup of coffee, come back in for a final panel. For those of you online, please hold on and we'll be right back. Thank you very much.
So when I get to introduce you, I'm going to hand you the booklet so that I can get my phone up. So when I get to introducing you, I'll give you this so you're ready to go. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We are now officially in the last session of the conference. The number of people that have responsibilities is getting less and less, but I'm very grateful to people that are with me up here to be part of this final panel, where our hope is to somewhat try to bring together many of the themes that have already been touched on. And hopefully do a bit of a deeper dive on some of those themes, just really through a dialogue between the five of us. And the title of this is very much about zooming out, looking at Africa as a continent. We've spent a lot of time on the first day looking specifically at Southern Africa, following on from the Treasure case study from 25 years ago. So we're going to just zoom out a little bit further here. Just to quickly mention, and welcome to those that have joined us online. I'm very grateful for this link up between OSRO's Wildlife Week and the Effects of Oil on Wildlife Conference. So thank you for those that weren't able to be here in person, but are taking advantage of being with us via the live stream. So yeah, really appreciate that. And just to begin with some brief introductions, and I think most of the folks that are here, you've already heard from today, so I'll keep their introductions fairly brief. But I'd like to start in reverse order and thank Daniela Perez-Bisso for being back on the stage after presentations in the last session. So Daniela, Senior Technical Advisor with Sea Alarm. Monica Stassen, also somebody you've heard from this week, who's the Preparedness and Response Manager at SANCOB. Lauren Fiorenga, who's the Senior Technical Advisor at ITOF. And Tanya Augusto, who is both the industry chair of GIWACAF, which is the Global Initiative for West, Central and Southern Africa, and also senior advisor for ExxonMobil as well. So I will introduce Tanya in a moment because in our exploration of this, we want to look at some case studies. So we are going to have a discussion, but we're actually going to share a few case studies as well. We'll extract some lessons learned from those case studies, how they apply to continuing to hopefully to advance preparedness within Africa, but also globally as well. And then we're going to have a discussion about that. But to really set the scene on this, I would like to invite Tanya to start with a presentation on GeoWACAF, which is part of the global initiative, and just present a little bit on what that is. So just to introduce Tanya, because this is the first time we're hearing from Tanya in the conference today. So Tanya is the Regional Preparedness and Response Advisor for ExxonMobil. She's been with ExxonMobil for 19 years and has been a member of their Europe, Middle East and Africa response team since 2017. She's also the industry chair, as I mentioned, of GeoWACAF, and has been a strong supporter, I would say, of wildlife response integration. She mentioned the exercise, but also regularly attending the Wildlife Preparedness and Response Community of Practice meetings and being on the steering committee for this conference as well. So we'll start with Tanya setting the scene with what's been happening from a GeoWACAF perspective.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Paul, for the great introduction. Let me just say that this is my third EOW, and it's my first presentation. So, yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited and honored. I will ask Vivi to make some ugly faces if I say anything nonsense, because we are Portuguese speaking, and you cannot realize how difficult it is for non-English speaking to come on stage and do a presentation. So, Vivi, I'm counting on you. But anyway, so I'm here to talk about global initiatives for oil spill preparedness and response processes in general, and then I'll bring you to the regional global initiative for West Central and Southern Africa. So what are the stimulus of those global initiatives? This is a IMO, International Maritime Organization from United Nations, and IPICA, the Global Oil and Gas Association for Advancing Environment and Social Performance, stems from the PRC 1990 protocol or convention to call governmental authorities to work together with the industry and build these oil spill response capabilities in a national level, regional level, and international level. So, what about those global initiatives? So there are long-lasting, successful partnership between IMO and IPICA, as I mentioned, has actually been launched in Cape Town in 1996. IMO has a very good approach to regional cooperation to promote those bilateral and multilateral cooperation through existing frameworks in the region. So the main objective of this partnership between IMO and IPICA is really to support countries to ratify and implement international conventions and standards for oil spill response and preparedness, encourage and facilitate the development of oil pollution response capabilities, and then make sure that it can be a catalyst for cooperation between industry and governments. So those are the main three objectives of those global initiatives. Okay, who help us doing this? Who are our key partners? I mentioned about IMO, which set the grounds and the standards to liaise with government, the IPICA that brings oil and gas industry to the table, and then there are key other important supporting organizations like the IOPC farms, the ITOP. We have representatives from ITOP here, governments, local industry, NGO organizations, and existing regional agreements. Like we hear, I think it was yesterday or the day before, about the Benguela Current Convention. There is the Nairobi Convention. There is the Abidjan Convention. There is a lot of other agreements, regional and international, that we leverage to develop our activities throughout the world. Okay, so this is just to illustrate what are the main established global initiative programs. So we have the OSPRIL, that is the GI from Caspian Sea, Black Sea, and Central Eurasia. We have the WCAF, and again, the names don't always resembling what these organizations represent, but initially it was West and Central Africa, and then after several years, we just included the Southern Africa. So currently, GIOCAF looks at West, Central, and Southern Africa. And there are a lot of conversations to see if we can start to look at the other side of the coast of the continent. There is the sea, which is for the Southeast Asia. And recently, there is ongoing conversations between the GI to create or revamp Caribbean region GI. Okay, so I look at the international perspective of the GIs. Now I'm bringing you guys to a more regional focus of the initiative, which is the GI WCAF project. The region has 22 countries, members of the project. This region, we all know that is a very dynamic oil and gas activities, and also an important navigation area to a lot of reasons, weather conditions, maritime security. So it's definitely a more active area related to the east side of the continent. It has been created, GIOCAF has been established in 2006. The main objective is really to enhance capabilities of states to prepare for respond oil spills. We provide the GIOCAF project provide technical support for the countries to develop their readiness to respond to a spill through organizing workshops, providing training, exercises, and also promote some regional conferences and interfaces between neighboring countries. GIOCAF get his budget from IMO and IPCA through the 8 oil companies, as you can see from the bottom side of the slide. So we have Azul, BP, Chevron, Eni, Exxon, Shell, Renaissance, and Total Energy. And the countries, you can also see on the map the 22 countries member of the GI project. Okay, how we do it, how we interact with the governments and industry. So we have a 3-step approach, kind of aligned with the general GIs, which is help the countries to establish legislation and regulation framework for oil spill preparedness and response on a national level. Then on the next step, we help the states to implement those legislations, like operationalizing those legislations through policies, procedures, operating procedures, so then to make sure that they can operationalize those legislations. And last but not the least is really to look at the cross-functional aspects, transborder cooperation, develop procedures to facilitate international assistance. Okay, so what are the ways we kind of achieve those steps? We have 4 main pillars to develop our activities. The first one is have a real established methods and tools to deal with the governments, like standard procedures, use IPCA guidelines, so then we can have a common approach throughout the 22 countries. Then on second step, we work close to the countries, either in person or online or virtually. We do workshops, we do training, we do exercises, and we invite our international technical partners like IPTOF, OSRL, to kind of help us to build those capabilities in a national level. Then we also use a lot of communication and networking. This conference, EOW, is one of the ways for GI to publicize and raise awareness on what are we doing, where are we, how we can continue to collaborate. We do also have our website which have a lot of our activities and processes. And one of the good things about GIOCAF, and it has been mentioned in some of the previous slides about language. So working with 22 countries that talk different language. So we try to cover all the language like Portuguese, French, English, and make sure that whatever we're passing on, and we would like the message to be clear to everyone. Okay. We also have our networking meetings and arrangements, either with national delegate focal points or the industry focal points. We have regular online meetings, so then we can make sure that whatever the project is doing is aligned with the expectations from national delegates and industry focal points. Then on the fourth step, we do also regional conferences. Every 2 years, so I forgot to mention that our program is a cycle of 2 years. So we have a work plan for 2 years, and at the end of a specific cycle, we do a conference. And I will talk a little bit about more about what what are the objectives of those regional conference. So it's definitely review the progress of the program activities, facilitate information sharing and lessons learned, address the challenges of oil spill preparedness and response within the region, strengthen the network between government delegates involved on oil spill preparedness, and also assess how GIOCAF should involve better to provide support. It's only easy when we are all together and we can kind of assess and understand what the improvement areas that we need to work on to better support the region. And at the end, with all those lessons learned, sharing of concerns, we determine the priority of the next 2 years. So then we build a plan for the next 2 years for the next conference. Okay. So we have realized or conducted 10 conferences in different of the countries members, which help us to kind of be diverse and make sure that everybody is involved on the process of setting the priorities, sharing lessons learned, and show how they progress on their countries on the oil spill response and preparedness. Okay, so it's not just about oil spill. Despite the fact that wildlife response in the region is very limited and non-well aware, but GIOCAF tried to put on the agenda of the conferences, country requests, the topic of wildlife response. Here are just a few examples of activities that GIOCAF facilitated to include wildlife response. For example, the 2019 conference in South Africa, we had a field visit that we took the delegates and the focal points to visit the Sankop Rehabilitation Center. And it was amazing how they were surprised what efforts it can take to protect and respond to a wildlife situation. Then in 2023, we got a request from Nigeria government to help them build their own wildlife response contingency plan. And I will leave this to Lauren, who will talk a little bit about this topic. And on 2024 conference last year, we make sure that we had on the agenda a workshop focus on wildlife response, and also on the tabletop that we use the C-Alarm gaming system, we included wildlife response focus. So then delegates and participants will be thinking on what would be the objectives and the strategies to protect wildlife and respond to all wildlife. So this is what GIOCAF does to kind of build the preparedness in the region with all the limitations, either from geographical, political situation, socio-economic situations, but this is what GIOCAF in a respectful manner works with governments to help them build their capabilities as per their priorities. So my next slide is my second last, and I want you guys to bear in mind this slide, because it will set the stage for the panel discussion or questions that we'll have right after. So this is just a picture of oil and gas outlook in the sub-Saharan Africa. So where, if you can see the top left map, it shows the current activities, which is heavily concentrated on the Western Central Africa. Okay, this is what's happening today. So if you look at the right top map, you just see the outlook or the forecast for the upcoming 15 years oil and gas activity. And just to say that with the oil and gas activity or upstream, midstream operations, it brings the shipping, the maritime shipping activity, because crude needs to be moved around, and so it will increase also maritime activity in the region. And the bottom middle graph is just a combination, and I just keep this one so we can see how busy the region will be for the upcoming years. So with that, we can see that there will be an increase on the oil spill risks. So the profile in the region will increase, despite with the low probability, as we hear throughout those 3 days, it happening less and less. But we know if it happens, it can be significant and major. So we need to make sure we continue to prepare and be ready to respond if it happens. Okay, so now in conclusion, so GI will continue to do the technical support to the governments in the light of the IPC convention, and continuing to enhance the capabilities of the states or governments to prepare and work with the industry on the spill response. And it is not just oil. We're also starting to look at HNS spills. We had a lot of some of the workshops talking about non-oil spills that are already in a rise on the risk, and also to encourage cooperation between industry and governments. So we will be here constantly adapting to the new challenges in the region. So the high oil risk, the sub-region protocols, and oil spill preparedness and technology. We will be continuing helping the governments to build their capabilities. So my last phrase, and if we count, probably communication, collaboration, cooperation have been said throughout the week many times, but is the key. Is the key. Communication at national level, regional level, international level will put us on a better position to cooperate in a spill situation. And when I say communication, language can be a barrier. And we need to make sure we start to build those relationships ahead in a peacetime, so then we can understand each other on the real event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tanya. That really sets the scene, and at least regionally, it shows us some of the efforts that are ongoing in the linkage between oil spill preparedness and wildlife response preparedness. What we're going to do now is take a little tour around the continent, and we're going to start with West Africa, because Tanya already alluded to it, that Lauren and Monica were involved in some activities in Nigeria. So we're going to start in West Africa, and we're going to work our way around. Actually, we're going to go counterclockwise, but Lauren, I'll to that. You go ahead.
Okay, yeah, so Tanya already mentioned this particular case study that we wanted to highlight in this panel. So in 2023, Monica and I, representing SANCOP and ITOF, undertook a workshop looking at oiled wildlife preparedness and looking specifically at getting a oiled wildlife contingency plan for Nigeria. This came at the request of the government of Nigeria and was facilitated by GI WACAF. I had a little look in preparing the slide at kind of the history, trying to dig through where this sort of came from, where this ask comes from. And there was quite a big spill in 2011. And we saw that actually previous to anyone on this panel's time in our organizations, there was a GI WACAF preparedness workshop following that spill. And we will talk more a little bit about that and the fact that incidents often instigate workshops and preparedness and an idea of identifying gaps. But there clearly was an incident that was quite big and identified gaps, and there was a workshop of which oiled wildlife was a section of. And then fast forward about 10 years later, we have our wildlife contingency planning workshop. So it was very successful. It was involved a lot of stakeholders at the workshop, I think, and I believe there is a draft version of that Monica has seen. So there's progress, but we haven't yet got to being published or anything like that. So that was just a zoomed-in example Tanya was mentioning.
Thank you, Lauren. So we'll stick with West Africa and then we'll keep moving on.
Yeah, so still in West Africa, but covering 3 countries of Mauritania, Senegal, and the Gambia. So our first engagement as SANCOB was actually in 2023, where myself and my colleague Nikki went to Mauritania to do a feasibility assessment for wildlife response for Shell. They were about to do some drilling and they just wanted to know what it would be like in a country that has absolutely zero wildlife preparedness and very little oil spill preparedness in general. It was a really educational exercise, an eye-opening exercise into cultural differences, language barriers, and perceptions around wildlife response in countries that wildlife isn't a priority. But it kickstarted some really good discussions, specifically with the NGO, that one of the NGOs that was based there. It didn't progress much further than the recommendations that we made, and we'll chat more why later. But 2 years later, we landed a contract under the UK government's Ocean Country Partnership Protection Programme to host a workshop that aimed to draft a sub-regional oil wildlife response plan. And this again was trying to close quite a very big gap. Most countries cannot develop their own contingency plans. They just don't have the money and the resources. But we thought if we could take a more regional level, that might kickstart countries to look internally at their own level. So that was a large portion of the first bit of this year. We hosted the workshop, we've drafted the plan, and we're hoping now that it'll proceed into that finalization phase at each of the countries' levels. And to address the language thing, the plan was translated into French as well. I did not do that. We had other people do that. But yeah, I'll leave some food. And the image in the bottom right-hand corner is just to show you the exploration activities that are happening in both countries. It's quite a hot spot for current existing operations and exploration activities. Oh. It's me again. So going straight down to Southern Africa, and I'll keep this brief because we've touched a lot on South Africa and a lot on Namibia. You can I did actually automate it. So this is just highlighting some of the progress that has happened in these countries. And I cover both South Africa and touch briefly on Namibia because there was a great presentation about what's happened in Namibia earlier this week. And really just the development of a national oil wildlife contingency plan that we would love to see finalized. The stockpiling of equipment in Cape Town and Gqeberha for seabird response, development of oil wildlife colony kits, basic kits at some of our key African penguin colonies, a team for seabirds, facilities, and most recently a trailer for seabird response. And I say seabird response because it's very specific to that species. And then you can, again, on the Namibia side, and this was also, they've developed a draft oil wildlife contingency plan. Some equipment stockpiles have already been sourced and some are currently underway. Some training has been done, colony kits have been developed. But I picked these 2 examples because a lot of this involves stakeholders coming together. It was not just government, there was a heavy involvement in the context of Namibia with SANCOB and with industry, Namdeb de Marine Foundation having to come in and provide some funding. And then in the South African context, some of our training and plans were funded through industry as well as organizations such as the Benguela Current Convention or AZA Safe out of the US funding equipment. So it was sort of this really stakeholders coming together to boost and try and improve wildlife preparedness in the region.
back over to me. So we're going to move around just to highlight some of the activities that have gone on recently in East Africa. This region has been consistently active, but we've seen an increase in the momentum in oil spill preparedness in this region. And that's primarily been driven through the Indian Ocean Commission, as well as the Nairobi Convention. So we're seeing a bit of an uptick. And if you go back to Tanya's beautiful maps, and you can see the predicted offshore activity and therefore the marine traffic, this might be fueling a little bit of that conversation. So we're seeing that East, it's got lower preparedness when you compare it to quite a robust GI WACAF system. And as you know, we don't have a GI yet that reaches up the East, but we are seeing through these main organizations, through these regional collaborations, that we are getting a little bit more activity on this side. So watch that space.
My turn. North Africa. So we've got 5 countries there: Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, and Egypt. Countries are contracting parties to the Barcelona Convention. So they've got REMPEC assisting them in preparedness and response when needed. REMPEC is an IM organization. And as I mentioned in my talk before, CLARM has got an MOU with REMPEC to support those countries that are needing response and preparedness on wildlife response. So CLARM, again, linked to EUROA. And also there is the Mediterranean strategy and their action plan as well, where wildlife, it is mentioned. So the Mediterranean strategy talks about integration of wildlife in a holistic and integrated approach to oil spill preparedness and response. So we did put some pressure there from CLARM to have that wording, and also to have that last sentence that all wildlife response should be integrated in that framework. Also, the action plan includes training. So there are in the CSO 1, the objective 1, it is mentioned that countries should be increasing their knowledge in different aspects of oil spill response and preparedness. And one of the topics is oil wildlife preparedness. So framework is there, not much done. But according to our country profiles, none of the countries have got a plan. None of the countries have done much on preparedness. However, while we do those country profiles, we contact stakeholders in the countries, 3 of them, there are 5 of them, and 2 of them recently, we've contacted them this year, and we see potential. We see organizations that are interested in wildlife response, and they are just lacking that connection with the authorities, with the whole structure of the oil spill response. So we need to push a little bit there to get them going. Projects in 2010, a long time ago, CLARM collaborated with an oil industry, an energy company, to do an exercise where the wildlife component was included. Also in Libya, we did a planning project and we drafted a wildlife procedure. Again, that procedure was done in 2013 and it was done remotely because of safety issues. So that's also something we are going to talk later about, safety in Africa. So we couldn't go into country, but something was drafted. But again, on the shelf. POSOF, European project, POSOF 1 and POSOF 2. So we know that we have trained on a basic level oil wildlife response, some volunteers on 5 of them, those countries. But again, long time ago, and they were just volunteers, so we cannot expect anything from that. And then there was Mapoko project from 2019 and 2020. We developed what we called a self-assessment tool. So all the countries from the Mediterranean region that are binded to the protocol, to the Barcelona Convention, can have this tool to complete a self-assessment on how much they are prepared on wildlife. Some of those countries have done that assessment tool, scoring not very good, but at least they did it, and which is good. The self-assessment tool is still a tool that we are promoting in the Barcelona Convention and the REMPEC meetings. We encourage all those countries to keep completing it so that they can track how much they are improving or not. Again, as much as we can do. I mean, it's each country's voluntarily willingness to do things, and we keep poking them, but there's so much we can do.
Great, thank you very much. Just really good to just paint a bit of a picture of just some of the initiatives that have been happening, some of the developments out there in the wider region. So we're going to tackle a few different themes here. And I think in terms of that risk landscape, it has been touched on a few different times through the conference. So in the time we have, we'll try to get really into the nuts and bolts of this. But maybe Lauren, if I come to you first. So there is a changing risk landscape. And I think it's safe to say that it's creating challenges just for oil spill preparedness in general. So what are the implications? What is that risk landscape? Maybe just to summarize, but also what are the implications or the challenges then for trying to make headway or to prepare from a wildlife perspective? And are there regional differences in terms of maybe that risk landscape and how it has an impact?
Okay, thank you. I do think we've covered this in a few different ways throughout the week, but for those of us who are joining on the live stream and perhaps haven't had the opportunity, I will just reiterate all of the themes that we've spoken about, which is the vessel rerouting. And if you don't mind just going through to the next slide, just to illustrate, you can see that through Red Sea security issues, we've got this vessel rerouting around the Cape. So we've got more traffic coming round, and that obviously just by pure numbers increases the risk, right? We've also got climate change and weather-driven events. So again, last year in South Africa, there were a spate of incidents that were happening in the winter here, bad weather, inexperienced crews, more vessel traffic, congested shipping lanes. It increases the risks, right? And so we're seeing that concentrated around the Cape per se, but it's also going to affect East and West. We also mentioned the dark fleet, and that's the alternate fleet. It's about 10%, they think, of the world's tankers at the moment that are shipping sanctioned cargo or calling at sanctioned ports. They don't operate within the international compensation regimes. So if an incident occurs involving one of these vessels, it's going to be a lot harder for cost recovery with this vessel. And that again increases the risk. And we are no strangers in this room to difficulty of funding. So that's another risk factor. And I wouldn't be representing ITOF if I didn't mention compensation and compensation regimes in particular. So we do have, since the 70s, we've got these international conventions that help to dictate where compensation you can get it from, how much you can get, and what's covered, right? It's been since the 70s, it's very well established. But with these alternate fuels, we don't have the same robustness in our legislation, if any robustness. So we have the H&S Convention that's hopefully coming into force, and South Africa is one of the countries that has ratified this, but it is not yet in force. It needs a few more countries to sign on to reach the minimum requirement. So we're looking at 5 to 10 years best case. When that is in force, it will cover impacts from H&S, hazardous noxious substances, as cargo. It will not cover, currently in its form, H&S substances as fuel. So when we're talking about using ammonia, when we're talking about using hydrogen as fuel and having an incident and having impacts arise from that, there is currently no legislation that will allow us to progress that quickly and have a clear route of compensation. So that is a significant risk factor. And especially when you look at the Cape and you look at the vessel traffic here, we've got a lot of container vessels coming around, right? So the other pollutants, and we've seen this with plastic pellets in South Africa, the risk of other pollutants that are not covered by any international conventions is there. We've seen it happen already, and the risk is not decreasing. I think that's it for me.
Did you want to mention this other slide as well?
So of plastic pellets, this is just a graph. The confirmed ship source plastic pellet spills we've had since about, I think 2012 is the earliest recorded one. There probably were ones before that. So you can kind of see a few hotspots in some of the shipping lanes. But yes, South Africa has had quite a few incidents. And as you can see, because of the different currents, the plastic pellets get spread very, very quickly over a very, very wide area. So large stretches of this coastline can become contaminated very quickly.
Thank you, Lauren. Tanya, do you want to just add to that? And I'm just thinking about the focus that a lot of countries are going to have on some of these new risks and how can, wildlife make sure it sort of gets incorporated into some of that thinking. But anything you just want to share in that risk landscape context?
Yeah, so Laura mentioned those climate, marine shipping activities. So I will keep looking at oil and gas activities that will continue. Unfortunately, despite the global energy transition around the globe, we are getting there, but we still relying our revenues in our industry. So there are a lot of still projects and operations on upstream, midstream, on relying on oil. So it will continue to be a high profile risk for oil spills. So related to how we make sure that the oil spill response and wildlife preparedness kind of increases along with the risk is really those types of global initiatives and regional collaboration and cooperation, boots on the ground, make sure we involve the local communities to understand the risks and the disadvantages of having a coast being affected by oil or any other type of chemical product, and keep the conversation. And we saw on some of the GAO's presentation, mobilizing people to our risky places and also safety. And even some of those beaches are not really accessible. So those are some of the challenge that the wildlife response teams need to face to kind of be ready to respond and prepared to respond.
Thank you. Yeah, so it gives us a lot of challenges to think about, but it sets the scene in terms of risk. The other challenge, when we think, I guess, about the continent as a whole, is one, the diversity of species, and also just the context. I think about inland versus marine spills as well. Is anything you want to share on that? Because obviously that's another key piece of the jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah, I think it's I mean, some of you would attend the presentation earlier. Specifically showed that the bulk of the spills we do see are marine-based spills, and that's obviously where our focus is going to be. And we get quite comfortable with how we respond, how we tackle seabirds, how we handle them. But there are other incidents that can happen, and we know from other examples within Africa that there's other species that can be affected. And I remember a discussion where someone said to me, "Oh, well, we could get camels oiled. How would you handle that?" I've never actually had that question posed to me before. How would you wash a camel? But it was a valid question, and we started unpacking some of those things in some of the assessments we did, and then things like crocodiles start coming up, and now you're starting to move into the realm of dangerous species from a human point of view as well, and that creates another layer of complexity. Is, where do you draw the line between we actually can't versus this maybe sacred crocodile or something that people view in a specific light. So, seabirds, I found in some of the trips that we went on, hold a very low priority ranking, and mammals and other things are much more important, and that's what they want to save. Even when you tell them rehabilitating a whale is going to be impossible, their mind goes there because it's a tourism or it's a value attractor. So you kind of have to learn to understand the context of the region and the people you're speaking to first, before you can just straight out of there say yes or no.
Daniel, you want to add to that?
I'm asked to do it, right? The strategy is definitely, different species, different strategies, and we guys are talking all the time about birds, marine mammals, marine animals, marine birds, but what about any inland species? So they've got different protocols, and the strategies might be completely different. And we were talking yesterday, I think it was, in the hazing and deterrence session, how important that is. So inland spills, we might be relying on primary and secondary strategies, because the tertiary strategies, so capture and rehabilitation, might not even be possible. And to add to that, I think the close. Okay, that's what I was doing wrong. And to add to that, what was I going to say? The local knowledge, I think, is key in those aspects as well. So the strategies and the protocols that you will need to follow I don't think tier 3 expertise will have all the knowledge about each individual species that we might find inland. So, and especially in Africa with that range of biodiversity. So I think the local knowledge, the rangers, they will know how to deal with a hippopotamus. They will know how to sedate it, how to, I don't know. And then the resources as well. I mean, do we have resources to respond inland? It's a big question. I mean, how do we get there? And I was thinking the other day as well, I mean, when we talk inland, I mean, if we talk shoreline, we are talking a scope of an area that is 180 degrees, more or less. But if we talk inland, it's 360. So we are doubling the scope of our areas to respond as well. So, and not to mention the rivers that you could have in that area as well, that may be spreading the oil even further. So larger areas, infrastructure, local knowledge. I mean, it's complex, and maybe that links to the, again, exercising and preparedness, definitely.
Great, thank you. So just going back to the case studies, the examples are interesting because they show that these initiatives are being triggered in different ways by different stakeholders. So I'm just curious, are we seeing a trend in terms of how or which stakeholders are initiating these activities? And is there a sort of recipe, or is there a way that we can ensure that they do sustain? Are there barriers that you see where, you know, maybe something happens and then it's really hard to keep it going? So I guess coming back to you, Monica, you know, do you see trends in that? Well, I mean, you've obviously been involved in quite a few of these country initiatives lately. So
it was actually funny when Laura and I were discussing this beforehand. The first thought that always comes to mind is two reasons. One, there's a spill, and then people panic, and then that's normally triggers the discussion. Or two, there's an activity that's about to happen. So there's an exploration that needs to happen. There's a project that needs to happen. There's a pressure. There's some sort of external driver that's pushing it. Or it's, you know, we're trying to tick some check box of making sure that we have covered our wildlife component of our ESIA, because it says in there that we need to look at wildlife. And sometimes it does feel a bit like that. Like we get good momentum, there's some funding, but then the activity passes, the spill is cleaned up, the wildlife are rescued, rehabilitated, released, and then the conversation collapses because there's often no further carrot, there's no further push. And unless it's regulated, it becomes almost just like someone's got to champion it the whole time. And then people leave as well. You get a great contact in government and then they resign or they get shifted into another position and you got to start the process all over again.
So to come to you, Lauren, and I was just thinking just to add to that too, because the example in Nigeria was somewhat about the country requesting support from GI WACAF. And so just to add to that as well is, you know, do countries know that they can request support? And, you know, is that an aspect that we can somehow motivate or promote?
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I think everyone in this room is raising awareness for all wildlife response and trying to integrate it. There's the word again, integrate it again into the wider spill response. And so I think we can keep doing that messaging and keep putting that pressure on from our different aspects. But I do want to reiterate what Monica just said about that continuity of contact is so key. We find it everywhere. It is not specific to Africa that we have these issues. We have it globally. But if you lose that contact, as we know, you're not only losing that experience and all of that workshop and facilitating that you've done before, but you're losing in the case of wildlife, the perception of the fact that we need to do it, right? So it's hard when you're thinking about oil spills in particular, but when you refine that to wildlife and you lose that contact who really gets that we need to have this as a conversation, and you're starting from zero again, you know, it really does slow progress up very, very well. And the other thing I wanted to just reiterate with that Nigeria case study that the government themselves asked for it was that when you have government buy-in, it's great because there's clearly motivation. Whatever source of that motivation it is, they want to get this output done. And in that case, it was a contingency plan. So that's fantastic because you're not trying to push a boulder up the wall. You know, you're working with someone who already has that buy-in. But what we often encounter is that typically means we're working to internal guidelines. And that's where GI and other regional collaborators really help to push that momentum forward. Because if GI WACF are saying, we'll put this workshop on, but we want to see some kind of progress by the end of the year, that really helps to facilitate. We all know if you give yourself a deadline or you give your colleague a deadline, it tends to slip a little bit more than if it was an external collaborator. And it's the same when we're talking about wildlife.
Tanya, you want to say something on that?
If I may add some on what triggers preparedness in the region. I talked about the communication and network. So we have a 2-year cycle conferences, but in the middle of those conferences, we do a lot of virtual networking with the delegates, national delegates and industry focal points. And the main agenda of those touch points is sharing whatever you guys are doing in your country. And it's not about competitiveness, but share best practices. And someone from other country would say, oh, I think we can do this too. How you did it? And then it starts to raise the awareness and the understanding that they can get assistance from the GI WACF project and from the industry and from the international technical advisors. So this is how we kind of raise awareness and the need from countries to start building their capabilities.
Thank you very much. And it's a good segue, I think, into this next theme, which is about integration and implementation. I remember it was a conversation with one of the other GIs where I think there's so much focus on trying to ratify conventions and, you know, sort of improve oil spill preparedness within countries. So they said to me, wildlife preparedness often is like the last to be invited to the dance. It's like somehow there's always this, well, we've got these other priorities first. We want to do it, we just haven't got to it yet. So integration has been this theme. How can we actually not get it front and center, but get it incorporated into all these other activities? So it's not a do later, but it's a do with and do, you know, as at the same time almost. So Daniela, do you have thoughts about that?
One of the things that we have to reinforce or make them realize is that if they prepare, it's not just because of the wildlife. They prepare for themselves as well. You know how much the impact is, the social impact of having oiled birds on a shoreline. I mean, that is something that is just there for them. I mean, it's a social impact. It's citizens will get mobilized, and depending on which country, you will get more or less people, but people will get into that shoreline collecting the animals. You will get the social media there. You will get that picture of the oiled bird or the oil seal or whatever into the media. And that is your reputation, it's the reputation of your country. So they have to be convinced that they are not doing it just because of the wildlife and saving the animals. They are also doing it to show that they care and that they can do something about it. So I think that's one of the key things. The other thing, I think Tanya was explaining about the GWACF structure, the tools they have. I think it's there to be used, and I think it's there to be, powerfully used a bit more. So I think more than just raising awareness on those activities, we have to do meaningful exercises to really make the point that we have to do something as well. And I think that's key. And integrating wildlife, there are levels and levels of integrating wildlife. So we've seen wildlife national contingency plans or industries contingency plans where they say, yeah, we integrated wildlife. You go, you flick through. Yes, there is a paragraph, 6 lines about wildlife. No, that's not integration. So integration means experts supporting you to put that information forward, that preparedness together with those that know about it and having it there to be used and to, when you say integrating means also implementing. So it also means exercises. It also means training. So it all goes together, integrate, but also implement. So it's a wheel in a way. So, yeah.
Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just to reinforce that often that paragraph, if you find it in the contingency plan, says call SANCOB or I don't know, we had this morning. I think in the Australian contingency plan, it was ask the state. They should maybe have a plan. But it's not integrated. It's not helpful. And as we all know, when an incident kicks off and we need to know a little bit more than that and how to actually get our responders out, that falls short. So yes, exercise.
Thank you. Tanya, you've got something to add to that?
The piece that has been focused on the last regional conference is the word operationalization. So taking from the paper and putting on the ground, moving. So there was a lot of discussion on, we have good plans, we have good procedures, following international standards and conventions, but we need to make sure that we can take those pieces and actions from the paper to the ground and make sure that they work. A phone call, you have a list of emergency contacts, and we know governments, African government, they change a lot. The number you called 1 year ago might be the same number you will have to call 1 year after. So make sure you really practice those processes and standards.
Thank you. Monica, I'm going to bring you into this one as well, just with one last part of this, which you talked about international standards. The whole of the last session was about all the developments at an international level. What is the role that the international expertise can play in supporting some of this?
I think it's building that tier 1 and tier 2 capacity, right? I think I've heard a lot of discussion around this, and I think everyone acknowledges it, that we don't want the perception to be that, tier 3 is the button that you push when you need it and the response is going to fall out the sky, fix everything, leave, and then we're golden. It can take time. It can take, I did a project recently where it would take at least a week to get equipment and people onto site. A lot of damage can happen in a week of a spill, especially when it's right near your shoreline and it's in the middle of the breeding season and turtles are coming to nest on your beach, and now you've got locals running around doing their absolute best because they care and they want to help, but not able to do much because they haven't had the training. So I think there's a real scope for bringing that, really encouraging that building of tier 1 and tier 2 capacity. And that comes from, and this is sort of my parting sentence under this topic, that wildlife needs to be considered as, under oilspill response, wildlife should not constantly be segregated. And it needs to form part of that first planning phase. As much as you plan your use of dispersants, as much as you plan your use of shoreline cleaning, wildlife should be right there in your progress.
Thank you, Monica. Great point. Thank you all for the comments on that. Moving on to our fifth theme here, which is more of that socioeconomic context, cultural realities of just, how does wildlife response and preparedness fit in with other priorities within a country? And I think, just thinking about that within Africa, I think the question is how do socioeconomic challenges affect wildlife response prioritization? I think there's different reasons to be prepared. There's maybe different motivations. So I think the question is really, how can we frame wildlife response in a meaningful and appropriate way in Africa? I guess that puts it within that both a sort of wildlife and human context. So Tanya, do you want to go to you first?
Yeah, so it is evident there is a lack of funds, resources, living conditions that will create this human-wildlife conflict. And it can be conflict for land, conflict for food. There are some places that there is an increase in urbanization, building new cities, and there will be this wildlife conflict. Should I keep those animals? How I don't have ways to keep myself? How I gonna create conditions to also accommodate or preserve or conserve those animals? So those are some of the conflicts between wildlife and humans in our region. Also governments, politics, and make sure that they include those wildlife conservations and protection within their economy diversity, and start to have the conversation with the locals with some inclusion, making sure that they understand those wildlife can be beneficial for them. It can be a tourism industry development. It can be a balance between food scarcity or climate change situation that they can balance and make sure that they take advantage of those situations and create new opportunity for grow social economic opportunities.
Thank you, Tanya. Monica, you want to add to that?
Yeah, just to say, I think, I've had people ask me questions like, how can you insist on access to fresh water when we don't even have fresh water to drink for washing a bird? And, it really made me think and reflect on, what am I doing in the training I'm giving and the needs of these people, and how do we put it into a point of view, and we have best practice and global standards, and we want to aspire to those, but to really understand the needs on that ground level. And I find it amazing that when you encourage people to talk and you listen to what they got to say and you look at ways to bring them into the conversation, how they responded to it, and how you explore what is available in their region and connect to what they could still do, that people really valued around it. And you, as Tanya mentioned, you found the value add, the context around the income, tourism, fishing, for example, is very relevant to many communities and the impact that could have and how you can bring that in. But then also acknowledging that, we had this in Nigeria where they said to us, if there was an oil spill and wildlife were affected, they would catch the birds and try and eat them. Not joking, full of oil. And we both were like horrified, but that's not our reality, that's their reality. So we need to work with local communities to help address that cultural perception as well, instead of just bulldozing in with our belief.
You have to be reasonable as well, because you need them on your side, because otherwise you won't be able to do anything. So that's key as well.
So thank you. And this is our final theme. I'm conscious of the time, so it was probably our last round, and we'll go through everyone for this one. But we've obviously focused mostly, and I think rightly so, on Africa. But one of the questions is, is this unique? Is what we are facing in terms of challenges in Africa with wildlife response preparedness, are we seeing it elsewhere? And I think what is that telling us as a community gathered here about what the priorities need to be for the future? When we leave this conference, we're not going to be back together for another 3 years, but what do we see as really those priorities for us as a community to keep driving this forward, whether that's in Africa or whether that's in the wider region? So Daniela, I'll come to you first on this, and we'll come this way.
I think it's not unique. I mean, the remoteness that we have in Africa, the lack of resources, the everything, the biodiversity, we have got many other places in the world that are facing the same. So I don't think it's unique. It doesn't mean that it shouldn't be focused, but it is not unique. And I think have been discussing all this week as well is that tier 1 and tier 2 resources and preparedness is key as well to be able to respond. So we need to focus on that. How? There are tools, I think. Some of them were presented. But yeah, let's try to work to, again, is the collaboration movement, et cetera, But yeah, GeoWACAF it's a tool that could be used, especially in Africa, to expand on that preparedness. Industry joining together in pairs, in trios, whatever you want, but industry are doing their explorations and their activities in many similar countries. So why don't they join together and do something together? I think that's also an important thing that might need to be highlighted.
Because what Daniela said, it's not uncommon. I've heard and had numerous discussions with colleagues over the week about challenges they face, and even in countries that have considerably more resources, it can still be a big barrier. Even in countries where we would say, you should know better, they don't always know better. And so I think it's also, a message that, again, that whole theme that's come through this week about collaboration, cooperation, and it really goes a long way when people unify behind a cause and a voice. And as I mentioned earlier on, it's that shift in that narrative that wildlife was separate and bringing wildlife into the conversation consistently. And many people in this room have been sounding that horn for many, many years. And it's now finding those leverage points where we can really start to see that starting to, like, actually happening, and taking that opportunity to come together, as Daniela said, and get industry involved in joint projects, get that exercise, have an exercise with a wildlife focus, only maybe as a starting point. Look at exploration, have your plan with wildlife from the start, and already that will start shifting the dial.
Yep, I will reiterate, but concisely in a slightly different way. I think, look, Africa has always been a continent for change, for progression. It's always been at that cornerstone, and I think today is no different. We're seeing it progressing with different types of exploration and vessel traffic, and we've got the old fields, but it is not unique to Africa. I would say Southeast Asia in particular is facing the same increase in vessel traffic, maybe a bigger increase in the number of dark fleet going around because of politics in that region. And so what I would say is keep our eyes on the horizon, because we might have lessons learned from other regions that Africa can very quickly use and adapt. So you're not alone in this in Africa. There are other areas that are doing it, facing the same struggles. And you know, if there is an incident and it happens to be in Southeast Asia, perhaps we can learn from it before it happens here. And then the other thing about how to really change this, I think it's just taking a organization or personal objective out of this to talk about wildlife response at every single engagement that you go to from here. And that's more for the platform that's, for instance, Tanya or myself or others have, where we're speaking to non-wildlife responders, right? That message needs to get out into the mainstream industry. So that's what I'm going to try and take away from here.
Yeah, so GI WCAF, it's setting the platform to create a national capability first. So we're talking about tier 1, tier 2. And then the third stage is those cross boundaries, regional and international cooperation and collaboration. Those type of conference definitely help to raise awareness and create this network. And being the current GI WCAF chair, I had a conversation with my dear Stel and Stella from the South Africa government, and we just like, we don't need to be big. We can start small. We don't need to do international conferences. We can do regional, virtual. Benguela Convention, Wildlife workshop, conference. Let's start small. Let's hear concerns for people about the subject. Let's hear from them what we have to put on the table as a solution, and bring them to be part of the solution. So this is what I'm getting and taking from this conference for during this week. And I have inspired you to continue this conversation and building awareness for wildlife response and protection.
We have. And if I just, as I bring this to a close, I think just reflecting again at the fact that we started talking about the treasure, this monumental rescue effort 25 years ago, but sitting through the presentations over the last 3 days, I'm really reminded about the monumental development since then. You know, I think just to appreciate the conscious effort to really design systems and to create stakeholder engagement, to develop these country models and to communicate and share, you know, what's working, what isn't. I see that there has been that development, and I would say certainly the model in GI WCAF is really setting a great example. I would say that hopefully we can replicate in other regions. And I think certainly the community of practice, which has been mentioned a few times, is at least one mechanism where we're trying to encourage, certainly from an industry perspective and other stakeholders to share their experiences of this. Nobody has the sort of magic recipe, but sharing the experiences. But it does seem like it's a conversation that it just needs to have everybody involved. And I love this idea of bringing it up at every opportunity. So that's your call to action when you leave this room. we're the only thing standing between the end of the conference and whatever you're doing next. I just lost the slides, but I just really want to end by saying a huge thank you to the panelists today, to Daniela, Monica, Lauren, and Tanya, for offering their expertise. Thank you very much for staying with us. And yeah, we wish you all safe travels from here, but thank you very much. Okay, so don't go anywhere because I believe we're going to segue right into the closing announcements and acknowledgements. So you are welcome to step down. Thank you very much.
I come to like, and those two are horrible. I'm like, oh my God, I can't.